I spent 60 years hating a man, not avoiding him, not forgetting him, hating him. And when I finally found him again, standing in the doorway of a quiet house in Ohio, I realized something I was not prepared to face. He was the only person left who remembered who I used to be. My name is Arthur Hale. I am 86 years old, and for most of my life, I believed one man had taken everything from me. It started in 1966, Ann Arbor, Michigan, the law building at the University of Michigan. Back then, the world still made sense to me. Effort led somewhere, talent mattered, and if you worked hard enough, there was a place waiting for you on the other side. I was close to that place, top of my class, shortlisted for law review. A professor had quietly suggested I apply for a federal clerkship. That wasn't just an opportunity, that was a future. The kind that shapes the rest of your life before it even begins. And then, in less than a week, it disappeared. They called it an academic integrity review. I remember how calm they sounded when they said it, as if the words themselves were harmless. But what they meant was this: someone had accused me of plagiarism. Not a mistake, not a missing citation, plagiarism. The kind that doesn't just follow you through school, but stays with your name long after you leave it. I sat across from 3 faculty members at a long wooden table. A file in front of them, my file. One of them adjusted his glasses and said, "Mr. Hale, portions of your submission are remarkably similar to an unpublished paper." Unpublished? That was the word that didn't belong. Because there was only one other person who could have had access to that paper. Victor Shaw. He sat 2 rows behind me in lectures, always composed, always controlled, the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to make you feel like you were already losing. We were never friends, but we understood each other, because in a place like that, you always know who your competition is, even when no one says it out loud. I tried to explain, told them I had written every word myself, that any similarity had to be coincidence. But even as I spoke, I could feel the outcome settling into place, not because of what I said, but because of what they had already decided to believe. The review lasted less than an hour. That was all it took. I wasn't expelled. That would have been simple. Instead, I was removed quietly from everything that mattered. Law review, gone. Recommendations, withdrawn. Clerkship prospects, erased before they ever had the chance to exist. No announcement, no confrontation, just silence. And in that silence, something inside me shifted, because there was nothing to fight, nothing to prove, only the understanding that something had been taken from me, and no one was going to give it back. A few days later, I saw him, Victor, walking across the courtyard like nothing had happened, books in hand, same steady pace, same unreadable expression. For a moment, I thought about going up to him, asking him directly, forcing him to say it. But I didn't. I told myself I didn't need to, that I already knew, that confronting him would only give him the satisfaction. It was easier that way, cleaner. And once you choose a story like that, you don't just believe it. You build your life around it. I took a job I hadn't planned to take. Turned away from a future that just days before had felt certain. And every step after that, every late night, every case I won, every success I forced into existence, was shaped by that moment, or at least by what I believed that moment meant. I didn't just lose an opportunity in 1966. I lost something harder to replace. The belief that the world was fair, that effort led somewhere predictable, that people played by the same rules you did. After that, I stopped believing in any of it. And in its place, I found something else, something sharper, something that stayed with me far longer than it should have. I found a reason to keep going, a reason to prove something, not to the professors, not to the system, to him, Victor Shaw, the man I was certain had taken my future and walked away with it like it meant nothing. And for the next 60 years, I never once questioned that belief. People like to believe that time softens things, that distance dulls the edges, that years somehow make the past smaller. They're wrong. Time doesn't soften anything. It sharpens what you refuse to let go. And I didn't let go of Victor Shaw. Not once. At first, it was easy to justify. I told myself I was just moving forward, building a career, making something of what I had left. I took a position at a mid-sized firm in Chicago. Not the path I had planned, but a path nonetheless. Corporate law, contracts, mergers, endless hours under fluorescent lights, chasing details no one else wanted to chase. I was good at it, better than good, because I had something most of the others didn't. A reason. Every late night, every case I refused to lose, every client I fought harder for than I needed to, it all traced back to a single, quiet thought. I will not be the man he made me. That belief carried me further than talent ever could. Promotions came, partnership followed, money, respect, a reputation that took decades to build. From the outside, it looked like a success. But success can be a strange thing, because sometimes it isn't built on what you want. It's built on what you're trying to outrun. And I never stopped running. Not from failure. From him, Victor Shaw. His name had a way of finding me. At first in small ways. A mention in a legal journal. A byline attached to a published article. Later, bigger things. Assistant district attorney. Then lead prosecutor on cases people actually talked about. The kind that made the news. I remember the first time I saw his name in print. I held the page longer than I should have. Read it twice. Not because I cared about the case, but because I needed to see it, needed to confirm that he was still out there, still moving forward, as if nothing had ever happened, as if 1966 had only happened to me. That was the part I couldn't accept, that whatever he had done, whatever he had taken, had cost him nothing. Years passed, decades even. I built a life, married a woman named Eleanor, had a home, a routine, a version of stability that on paper looked complete, and still. There were nights I would wake up with that same room in my head, that same table, that same file, that same moment everything shifted. Eleanor used to ask me sometimes why I worked so much, why I couldn't just stop. I never gave her a real answer, because how do you explain something like that? How do you tell someone that your entire life has been quietly shaped by a man you haven't seen in decades? So I didn't. I told her what people always say, that it mattered, that it was important, that I was building something for us. And in a way, that was true. Just not the whole truth. The whole truth was harder to admit, even to myself, because somewhere along the way, it stopped being about proving him wrong and started being about something else, something I didn't want to name. Then in 1994, I almost saw him again. It was a conference in Washington, D.C. Legal professionals from across the country. Panels, discussions, the usual kind of thing people pretend is more important than it is. I wasn't even planning to attend the reception that night, but someone convinced me, said it would be good for connections, good for visibility. I remember standing near the back of the room, half listening to the conversation I wasn't really part of, when I heard his name, Victor Shaw, not from him, from someone else. A casual mention, a reference to a case. I felt it immediately, not anger, something sharper, recognition, like a part of me that had been quiet for years, suddenly waking up. I turned, slowly, scanning the room, and then I saw him, across the room, near the far wall, older, of course, but unmistakable, same posture, same stillness. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the people, the years in between. All of it collapsed into a single point. This was it, the moment I had imagined more times than I could count. I could walk over, say his name, ask the question I had carried for nearly 30 years. Why? It would have taken less than 10 seconds. 10 seconds to confront something that had shaped my entire life. I started moving, one step, then another, and then I stopped. No reason, no interruption, just stopped. Because in that moment, a thought slipped in that I wasn't prepared for. What if he doesn't remember me? It hit harder than anything else ever had, harder than anger, harder than resentment. The idea that I had carried him for decades, and he might not have carried me at all. I stood there, watching him from across the room, close enough to reach, too far to matter, and after a few seconds, I turned around, walked out, didn't say a word, didn't look back. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need closure, that I had already moved on, but that wasn't true. The truth was simpler and harder. It was easier to hate him from a distance than risk being wrong. And so I kept my distance for another 30 years, until distance was the only thing I had left. There's a moment that comes, if you live long enough, when the future stops feeling like something ahead of you and starts feeling like something behind. I didn't notice exactly when it happened. There wasn't a date, no clear dividing line, just small things, names taking longer to remember, stares that used to mean nothing, now asking for pause, rooms that felt quieter than they used to. After Eleanor passed, the silence became something else entirely. Not peaceful, just permanent. Here we had been married for 42 years, long enough that you stopped thinking of life as something separate. And when she was gone, it wasn't just grief, it was disorientation, like the map I had been using no longer made sense. For a while, I filled the space the only way I knew how. Routine. Coffee in the same chair every morning, newspaper even when I stopped reading most of it, television in the evening, not because I was watching, but because the sound made the house feel less empty. Time passed, quietly, without asking much from me, until one afternoon, it did. It started with a phone call, my doctor's office, routine checkup results, Nothing urgent, they said, nothing immediate. But there was a pause in the conversation that didn't belong there, the kind of pause you only notice because something in you recognizes it. "We'd like to monitor a few things more closely, Mr. Hale." Monitor, that was the word. Careful, neutral, controlled, just like academic integrity review had been. I hung up and sat there longer than I expected to, not afraid, not exactly, just aware. Aware in a way I hadn't been before. Because for the first time, it wasn't abstract anymore. Time wasn't something I had. It was something I was using up. And suddenly, there was a question I couldn't avoid. What had I done with it? The answer came faster than I wanted it to. I had worked, built a career, provided for my family, checked every box that was expected of me. But underneath all of that, running quietly, consistently for decades, there had been something else. A story. One I had never gone back to question. Victor Shaw. I hadn't said his name out loud in years, but it was still there, unfinished, unanswered, unresolved, and now, for the first time, it felt unnecessary. Not the anger, the distance, the assumption, all the things I'd carried without ever testing them. I stood up, walked to the small desk near the window, opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. And there it was, a folder, thin, worn at the edges. I didn't remember putting it there, but I must have, because when I opened it, everything came back faster than I expected. Notes, old drafts, a copy of the review summary, and then something I hadn't thought about in decades. A letter, unsent, addressed but never mailed. Victor Shaw. I held it for a long time before opening it, as if the version of me who had written it might still have something to say that I wasn't ready to hear. When I finally read it, I almost didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't angry, not the way I expected it. It was searching, asking questions, trying to understand. Did you do this? And if you did, why? No accusations, no certainty, just doubt. Doubt I had forgotten I ever had. I sat there, letter in hand, and realized something that unsettled me more than anything else had in years. I hadn't always been sure. At the beginning, I had questioned it, considered the possibility that I might be wrong, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking, stopped wondering, and replaced that uncertainty with something easier to carry. Certainty. I leaned back in the chair and said his name out loud for the first time in years. Victor? It sounded unfamiliar, like a word from another language, and in that moment, the question changed. It was no longer, why did he do it? It became something else, something quieter, more dangerous. What if he didn't? I didn't sleep that night, not really, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, while 60 years of assumptions shifted into something less stable. By morning, I had made a decision, not dramatic, not sudden, just clear. If there was still time, I wasn't going to spend it carrying a story I had never tested. I was going to find him, not to accuse, not to prove anything, just to ask. It took longer than I expected. Old contacts, university records, a few calls that led nowhere before one finally did. People move, names disappear, lives branch in directions you can't follow from the outside. But eventually, I found an address. Suburban Ohio, a quiet street I'd never heard of. I wrote it down carefully, checked it twice, as if it might disappear if I didn't. And then I sat there looking at it. Because finding him was one thing, going was something else entirely. For a long time I told myself I would wait, a few days, a week, maybe. Think it through. Prepare. But I recognized that feeling. I had lived with it before. That quiet instinct to delay, to postpone, to leave things unresolved just a little longer, and I knew where it led. Another 30 years, another lifetime of distance, another ending without an answer. So I didn't wait. I picked up my keys, took my coat, and for the first time in 60 years, I started moving toward him. The first hour felt ordinary. That was the strange part. After 60 years, after everything I'd carried, everything I had built around a single name, turning the key in the ignition felt no different than any other morning. The engine started. The radio came on. The world continued. For a while, I almost believed this was just another drive, another errand, another destination that would come and go without changing anything. But somewhere past the city limits, that illusion faded. Chicago fell behind me in slow, familiar fragments. Traffic thinning, buildings giving way to open road, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just memory. And ahead, nothing but distance. I kept both hands on the wheel, not because I needed to, because it gave me something to hold on to. The highway stretched out in long, quiet lines, miles passing without asking anything from me. But inside, something had started moving, not fast, not all at once, just enough to make the silence feel different. I stopped once for gas. A small station just off the highway. The kind of place you don't remember even while you're standing in it. I filled the tank slowly, watched the numbers climb, listened to the sound of the pump clicking into place. Ordinary things. Simple, predictable. I went inside, bought a coffee I didn't really want. The girl behind the counter smiled politely. "Long drive?" she asked. I nodded, didn't explain, because how do you explain a drive like that? How do you tell someone you're on your way to confront a version of your life you haven't touched in 60 years? You don't. You say what people expect. Yeah, just a few hours. She handed me the receipt. Drive safe. I thanked her, walked back out, and for a moment, I just stood there, next to the car, coffee in hand, looking at nothing in particular, because something had shifted again. Subtle, but undeniable. The closer I got, the less certain everything felt. Not about where I was going, about why. I got back in the car, started the engine, and kept driving. Ohio came quietly. No announcement, no clear light that said you had crossed into something different, just small changes. The shape of the land, the spacing of the houses, the way the light settled across the road in the late afternoon. I followed the GPS, turn after turn, each one bringing me closer to something I had spent a lifetime avoiding, and somewhere along the way, a thought returned, the same one that had stopped me all those years ago. What if he doesn't remember me? It didn't come as a question this time. It came as a weight, heavier now, because this time I wasn't standing across a room. I was driving toward his door. There would be no turning away. Not without knowing. Not without choosing it again. I tightened my grip on the wheel, told myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't here to be remembered, that I was here for answers. But even as I thought of it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Because if he didn't remember, then what had all of it been all those years? All that anger, all that certainty, built around someone who might not have carried me at all. The GPS voice broke the silence. Turn right in 500 feet. I slowed, signaled, turned, the road narrowed. Residential now, trees lining both sides, houses spaced evenly apart. Quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice when you've spent your life in noise. I followed the numbers, counting them without realizing I was doing it. Each one bringing something tighter into my chest until finally the voice spoke again. You have arrived. I didn't move. The engine idled softly. The house sat in front of me, nothing remarkable about it. Single story, light siding, a small porch with a chair near the door. It could have been anyone's house, anyone's life, and yet it wasn't. I turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything on the drive. For a moment, I stayed where I was, hands still on the wheel, eyes on the front door. 60 years. That's how long it had taken to get here. Not the miles, not the hours on the road, the time, the distance I had built without ever moving. I reached for the door handle, stopped. Not because I couldn't open it, because once I did, there would be no version of this where I didn't know. No space left for assumption. No distance left to hide behind. Just truth, whatever it was. I opened the door, stepped out. The air was cooler than I expected. Late afternoon, leaning toward evening, I walked up the path slowly, each step deliberate, measured, as if the ground itself might shift if I moved too quickly. When I reached the porch, I could hear it, faint. Movement inside, a chair or footsteps. I wasn't sure. I stood there for a moment, closer than I had ever been, closer than I had allowed myself to be for 60 years. And for the first time, the anger wasn't what I felt. It was something else, something quieter, uncertain. I raised my hand, looked at the door, and realized this was it. Not the confrontation, not the argument, just a single, simple act. The one I'd avoided my entire life. I knocked, soft at first, then again a little louder, and as I stood there, waiting, I understood something I hadn't before. It had never really been about what he did or didn't do. It was about this moment, the space between not knowing and finding out. I heard footsteps approaching, slow, uneven, closer, and then the handle turned. The door opened slowly, not with hesitation, but with effort, and for a moment I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. He was smaller than I expected, not in height, in presence. The kind of presence I had carried in my mind for 60 years. Sharp, composed, unshaken, was gone. In its place was a man holding the edge of the door as if he needed it to stay upright. His hand trembled, not violently, just enough to notice. His shoulders slightly curved forward, as if time had been pressing on them longer than he could remember. And his eyes, they weren't cold. They weren't calculating. They were searching, trying to place something or someone. I stood there, looking at him, and felt something shift so suddenly I didn't have time to resist it. I had prepared to face a man. What I found was time. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was softer than I expected, not weak, just worn. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. For 60 years I had imagined this moment, rehearsed it in different ways, different tones, different outcomes. But none of them included this. None of them included not knowing what to say. "It's been a long time," I finally managed. He watched me for a second longer, then something flickered. Recognition, not fully formed, but close enough to feel, "Arthur?" He said it carefully, as if testing whether the name still belonged. I nodded. And in that moment, something in his expression changed. Not fear, not guilt. Something closer to surprise. "Well," he said quietly, almost to himself, "I'll be damned." There was no hostility in it, no tension, just a kind of quiet acknowledgement that something unexpected had happened. He stepped back slightly, holding the door open. "You might as well come in." It wasn't an invitation filled with emotion. It was simple, practical. The way people speak when they've stopped expecting anything dramatic from life. I stepped inside. The house was modest, clean but lived in. Books along one wall, a chair near the window, a small table with 2 cups already set out, as if he had been about to make tea before I arrived. He moved slowly toward the kitchen. "Give me a minute," he said. My hands don't move as fast as they used to. I watched him as he filled the kettle. The same man, and not the same at all. The distance between who I remembered and who stood in front of me wasn't just years. It was something deeper, something I hadn't accounted for. He set the kettle down, turned back toward me. "You're a long way from Michigan," he said. "I live in Chicago," I replied. He nodded, as if that made sense, as if all the years in between could be explained that simply. We stood there for a moment, 2 men in a quiet room with 60 years sitting between us. I realized then, if I didn't say it now, I might never say it at all. "Did you do it?" The words came out sharper than I intended, more direct, less controlled, but I didn't take them back. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at me. Not confused, not defensive, just thinking. "Do what?" he asked, and for a second, I felt something inside me tighten. Not anger, something closer to disbelief. "The paper," I said. 1966, the review." He held my gaze, and then very slowly he shook his head. "No," he said. "Just that. No explanation, no justification, just one word." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Not relief, not yet, because one word wasn't enough to undo 60 years. "You had access to it," I pressed. "You were the only one who did." "That's true," he said. No hesitation, no attempt to deny it. I did. The kettle began to hum softly behind him. He didn't move to turn it off, not yet. "I found the similarity," he continued. "I brought it to Professor Klein." The name hit me like something pulled from deep storage. Klein, chair of the review committee. I told him I thought it might be a mistake, Victor said, that maybe you had seen the same source, worked from the same notes. I stared at him, trying to match his words with everything I had believed. They didn't see it that way, he added. The kettle clicked, steam rising quietly into the air. He reached over, turned it off, poured the water into 2 cups with a steadiness that didn't match the tremor in his hands. I argued against formal action, he said. More than once. He handed me a cup. I didn't take it right away because something inside me, something I had built carefully over decades, was beginning to crack. And after that, I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, then walked to the table, picked up something I hadn't noticed before, a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. He held it out to me. I wrote this, he said, a long time ago. I took it, slowly, opened it, and as I read, I felt the ground beneath 60 years of certainty shift in a way I couldn't stop. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a confession. It was an apology. Not for something he had done, for something he hadn't been able to prevent. I tried to speak for you. I don't know if it mattered. I should have done more. I looked up. The room felt different now. Not smaller, not larger, just changed. I never sent it, he said quietly. I wasn't sure it would help. I didn't know what to say, because for the first time there was space where certainty used to be. Space filled with something unfamiliar, doubt. Not about him, about myself, about everything I'd believed without ever questioning. I thought, I started, then stopped, because the sentence no longer made sense. He watched me, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, just understanding, as if he had been waiting for this moment without knowing if it would ever come. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. It had never been as simple as I needed it to be. So we sat down at the table, not as enemies, not even as rivals, just 2 old men in a quiet house with more past behind us than future ahead. The tea sat between us. Steam rising slowly, fading into the air before it could fully take shape. For a while, neither of us spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much, and neither of us seemed to know where to begin. I looked at the letter again. The paper had aged, the ink slightly faded, but the words, they hadn't. They were still there, unsent, unanswered, waiting. All these years, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. I thought you... I know, he said, not interrupting, just finishing the thought without needing to hear it. I nodded because there was no point denying it now. I built everything around that, I said. My work, my choice, the way I saw the world. I let out a breath, even the way I saw myself. He didn't respond right away, just held his cup with both hands, as if the warmth mattered more than the tea. We all build our lives on something, he said finally. Sometimes we don't realize what it is until much later. I looked at him, really looked this time, not as the man I remembered, but as the man in front of me, the tremor in his hands, the quiet in his voice, the absence of anything I'd once called threatening. Time hadn't just changed him, it had stripped him, stripped away everything that wasn't essential, and I wondered, what had it stripped away from me? "I saw your name," I said after a moment, "over the years." He gave a small smile, not always for the right reasons, I hope. "It didn't matter," I replied. "Every time I saw it, it felt like something unfinished." He nodded slowly. "I felt that too. He's dead." That caught me off guard. "You did?" He looked down at the table for a moment, then back at me. "You were the only one who ever pushed me," he said. "Back then." The words landed differently than I expected, not like a compliment, like a truth I hadn't considered. "I measured myself against you," he continued, "even after you were gone." I didn't know how to respond to that, because it didn't fit with the version of him I'd carried for so long. "I thought you hated me," I said. He shook his head. "No," he said simply. "Not then, not now." He paused, then added, "I thought you hated me." I let out a quiet breath. There it was. The symmetry I hadn't seen. Two men, standing on opposite sides of the same moment, each one certain the other had chosen something they hadn't, each one building a life on that assumption, and neither one ever turning back to check if it was true. "I almost came up to you once," I said. "Washington, 94. He looked at me, surprised. "I was there," he said. "I saw you." That stopped me. "You did?" He nodded. "You were across the room." A small pause. I thought about coming over. I felt something shift again, not sharp this time, something softer. "And you didn't," I said. "No," he replied. "Same reason, I imagine." We both sat with that for a moment, and then unexpectedly we laughed. Not loudly, not for long, but enough to feel it, enough to recognize something we hadn't allowed ourselves before. We hadn't been enemies, not really. We had been reflections. Two versions of the same need, to matter, to be seen, to be remembered, and somehow, in trying to prove something to each other, we had given each other exactly that. "You know," he said after a while, looking down at his hands, "there aren't many people left who remember those days." I nodded, because I understood what he meant. The professors, gone. The classmates, scattered or worse. Entire chapters of our lives that existed now only in memory, and even those memories fading, except here, between us. "You remember it," I said. "So do you," he replied, and in that simple exchange there was something I hadn't expected to find at the end of all this, not closure, not justice, something quieter, something more complete, recognition not of what had happened, but of who we had been and who we had become. I looked at him, this man I had carried for 60 years, and felt something I never thought I would, not anger, not regret, gratitude. "You were the only one who stayed," I said. He frowned slightly. "In my story," I clarified. For a moment he didn't respond. Then he gave a small nod, as if he understood exactly what I meant, because he had lived it too. We finished the tea slowly, no rush, no urgency, just time. the kind that no longer needed to be filled with anything other than presence. When I finally stood to leave, the light outside had changed, softer now, settling in. I moved toward the door, then paused, turned back. He was still sitting at the table, hands resting quietly in front of him, watching, not holding on, not letting go, just there. I walked back, reached out, and for a brief moment, I placed my hand over his. Not a gesture I'd planned, not something I would have done at any other point in my life. But here, it felt right, simple, enough. He didn't pull away, just looked at me and nodded once. I stepped outside, closed the door gently behind me, and stood there for a moment. On the same porch I had been afraid to walk onto. Just hours before, the air felt different now, not lighter, just clearer, as if something that had been sitting between me and the world for decades was no longer there. I walked back to the car, started the engine, and for the first time in 60 years, I wasn't carrying him with me, not as a weight, not as a question, but as something else, something I hadn't known I was missing, a witness. We spend our lives fighting people we believe are our enemies, holding on to stories we never stop to question, building entire identities around moments we never revisit. But sometimes, the person you thought took something from you is the only one who remembers who you were before the world changed you. And when they're gone, a part of that story goes with them. So if there's been someone in your past, someone you've carried longer than you should, maybe it's not about proving anything anymore. Maybe it's about asking before time answers for you.